Hello, everyone. I trust you've been enjoying the second day of the Peace Summit, Peace in Action so far. My name is Maryam, Ishani, and I'll be hosting today's program on photography, how it serves to tell the whole story. Joining me today are photographer and journalist and activist Devin Allen and fine art photographer and activist Rosa María. Zamarrón. Thank you so much both for being here today.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for having me too.
I wanted to start by asking you both, described yourselves as giving voice to the communities you work in. I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about that community, that voice, and how you're using your lens to amplify it. Maybe I'll start with you, Maria.
So I live in Southwest Detroit. This is where I grew up since, I was 10. And it's just natural to want to speak up for your community that you live in. And I also work a lot with Indigenous people, which is a story within itself and within my own, journey. And so it becomes something that you can't not pick up your camera when you see family doing things or when you see things happening in your community and you want to, lift up those voices and you want to showcase what's really happening, where you live and with the people that you see on a daily basis. And even if you don't talk to them often. So that's really, it was something that just happened naturally, especially since I've loved to photograph since I was young, so.
Yeah, thank you. Devin, can I ask the same from you? You're in Baltimore.
Yes, born and raised in Baltimore, in West Baltimore. I've been here all my life. And, it's a fairly small city where everybody knows everybody. It's like one or two, three generations removed. Like if you probably went to school with somebody's cousin or our parents might have grew up together. So it was a real close-knit community from the east to the west to the south side. So always, just being in Baltimore growing up, I hated my city growing up because I went through so much, like gun violence. I lost a lot of friends to the streets and things like that. But when I found photography, I actually fell in love with my community. I always felt like I didn't have a voice, and the things that we went through in my community, that just is what it is. And Baltimore has always had, as far as media, had a bad rep. Everyone knows us for The Wire, The Corner, our murder rate. We used to be the heroin capital of America at one point in time, but people don't really know those intimate moments that, I get to see every day. If it's just eating crabs on the stoop or going to the park to watch everybody ride dirt bikes up and down the street and wheelie. So, when I finally got the camera in my hand, which was a little bit later in life, I wasn't maybe around 24 when I started, I found interest in photography, but it allowed me to control the narrative of my community and then project what I wanted to project, and kind of change the negative aspect to still humanize my community as we get demonized so much. And that's what I think that I get to do for my community and really, show the light and the positivity and everything in my community.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look back on kind of the major stories, I'll start with you, Devin, this time, the events that you've covered, and you've covered some major, stories that captivated the whole country. Are there, going back, images that for you are like milestone markers, or perhaps a moment in which you felt like the narrative went up a level through an image?
Yes, when Freddie Gray passed away back in 2015, I was one of the people on the ground that actually caught national attention. There was a lot of us. Me and Freddie Gray actually had mutual friends. Like I said earlier, Baltimore is so small. And a couple of years before that, before I started doing photography, one of my friends was killed by Baltimore City police. His name was Sean Gamble. And I didn't have a voice back then. But once I started doing photography and Mike Brown passed away, we did a solidarity march. And that's when I started understanding the power of a photograph. And I started understanding what people like Gordon Parks would say that a camera is a weapon. And, I think the time cover, I didn't think anything of it. I just wanted to tell the story, because I already knew the way my city was going to respond because of the type of resilient spirit that we have. And I just wanted to go out and just tell a real story because I knew people was only going to focus on the negative aspects. Freddie Gray, as soon as he passed away, they talked about his criminal record. Oh, he had a pocket knife on him. It was all these negative things. And I wanted to show everything. And the way that I did that was I just took the images and I just sent them, put them on Instagram and Twitter, you know, because I was shooting in real time and I would Wi-Fi images to my phone so I could move slightly faster than the rest of the media outlets. And the time cover really changed everything for us here because it really put us on a national platform. You know, every day that I think about that image, it always reminds me that my career was actually built on a broken back of Freddie Gray, because his death, that image launched me and it activated a lot of us in the community. So I think that image and the fact that it was used globally and it inspired so many people, but it inspired a lot of my peers and people to on the ground to do the work that we do, that we're continuously doing today.
I mean, you've described an interesting phenomenon for how easy it is, I think, for someone to pick up and capture an image. That makes it both, you know, as an audience, we're consuming more images than ever before and more easy because there's just so many great ones out there. How do you identify an image that you think will rise up? It makes it so much harder for you than to identify an image that you think will stand out.
You know, I really, when I'm out capturing, definitely things like that. If it's a protest or something that I just believe in, you know, like I always tell, like I teach, and I always tell my students to shoot with your heart and not your eyes. So I always try to capture images that I feel are moving, you know, that, you know, can inspire, you know, that's what I try to create imagery like that. So a lot of times, you know, the time cover wasn't even my favorite image that I thought was, you know, the best one. You know, I usually try not to think about that. I just try to be there in the moment and making sure that when I capture these images, it's, you know, it's inspiring people. So I really don't even think about things like that. I just create the work and then I put it out into the world, you know. So usually when I'm documenting those things, I'm not even thinking about myself or my career. It's more so about capturing the moment, controlling that narrative, getting out to the world so people can see what's going on. So that's kind of usually what my hit is when I'm documenting or working on anything that's community based. You know, I try to put community first and then put my thought and my process on the back burner.
I want to go back to you, Rosa. Similar question. I mean, you've captured images as well that are just absolutely, it's tough to use the word iconic, but really are. How do you look back on the body of work? Are like Devin just described, are there images that for you were really meaningful, but maybe aren't the ones that everybody knows right away?
Yeah, I think when you're putting work out there, you don't have control of what people are drawn to. So when I'm photographing, it's like Devin said, I'm photographing because it means something to me. Because in that moment, I have this feeling, and the way that I photograph is collaborative and very intuitive. And so I am just kind of lost. It's like I'm not really there. It's like you're just like this energy moving and you're drawn to certain people and certain things that are happening. And so when I'm looking at pictures, sometimes I don't even remember, like, you know, that I had clicked it or anything like that. And for me, it's not necessarily like the photograph itself that means a lot. For me, it's the people that I met and that I learned from and that I learned their story. Like, I don't necessarily am looking to take a specific photo. It's that moment, what that means to me. And hopefully that emotion translates to the viewer and to the audience to help them, you know, see something different about that time and that energy. So yeah, that's really like what I, you know, the way I see my photography.
I mean, once you go through images, you see one that you think, like, I think this one's special, I want to share this one. Is it like, do you feel at that point a bit of sense of, I want to find the right place now for this image? Or like, are you protective about it? Or are you thinking, I want to get this to the widest audience that I can?
I definitely don't it depends. So for the most part, like, I didn't share a lot of images that I took in Standing Rock because I was a little protective about them. And there's certain images and certain things that you're like, maybe this isn't the right time. Or if you're photographing a specific, you know, protest or something, why am I sharing this image? Why is this my story to tell? And so, you know, it just has to all align, and then that's what you're putting out there. So I have a pretty good idea of when I'm working on personal projects. Those are the ones that like sometimes I'll wait and then sometimes I'll just put them out there as it goes because I feel like it's important to say. So at least with my decolonizing spaces project, it depends on, the time period and, like what we're discussing and what the photo is about. Like one that I recently photographed is about Belle Isle because there's so many things that are happening at this. Belle Isle is like an island that's in, off like kind of near downtown Detroit. And there's a lot of things going on, regarding Indigenous people, their rights for that land, and, the city trying to do like the Grand Prix. And, I posted that before my whole, project is completed because I think it's important to start that conversation, especially as the elections here in Detroit are going to start happening for the mayor and everything.
Yeah. Devin, you've actually been quite protective of certain images. Can you describe a little bit for you what's the thinking for you when you're trying to find the right place for the image? Like you talked about going on Instagram for some, but you've definitely been protective about others. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, even though, I'm born and raised in Baltimore, I still have a lot of respect for my community. Growing up here, I try to be, of the community because I'm from here, but I also try to be from outside the glass looking in, and I try to respect everybody's journey. When it comes to protests and when I'm documenting those moments, I'm very cognizant on how I shoot things. Because one, I understand, for instance, I was harassed by police after my imagery back in 2015. So I know how I feel to be harassed by police officers, after you're doing the work that you do. So I'm very protective of my peers, like my people that I know that are on the ground, that I know that are organizing. And I know, I have imagery that probably will never see the light of day just because of it will put one of my peers in danger. So I'm very, very protective on how I shoot scenarios. I capture everything, but I'm very cognizant and I'm thinking when I'm shooting, if I see something being destroyed, I'm going to shoot it in a certain type of way, in an obscure or artistic way that is not, making a person vulnerable or subjected to things that we're fighting against right now. So a lot of times when I'm shooting stuff like that, I'm very, very paying attention to my angles, how I shoot people's faces. Some people can be photographed where I know some activists that are really getting harassed on the ground, to the point where police officers are going to their house and things like that, things they have told me personally because of my connection, that I'm not going to capture this image or I'm not going to show this person, or I'm going to take a picture and post it later because I don't want this person to give up their location. So a lot of times I do think about those things depending on who I'm capturing. But if it's like an everyday thing, I document Baltimore everyday life. I'm just capturing everything and showing the beauty in my city. So I'm just shooting and posting and sharing, on a regular day basis. Usually I usually stick to social media and Instagram, I really create for myself and then I just hope people like it later. So a lot of times, I started on Instagram and using social media as a tool so I could continuously use that tool to, share the story of Baltimore. But when I'm shooting, I just try to be respectful. And I don't want anyone put in danger behind my work because some of the stuff that I do shoot can put people in danger, in a lot of the situations we have been in.
And I mean, just so this is, we can learn from this really interesting what you're saying, like, are you seeing photographers in these situations where you think, the way that they're, positioning themselves and what they're capturing is a bit either exploitative or putting people at risk? Are you seeing that behavior?
I think a lot of it was kind of aired out last year, during George Floyd, the Tony McDavid, and Breonna Taylor. I really can't speak for anyone else. I try not to, bash any other photographers or talk down on them. But I've been on the ground 4 years. I respect other people's community. Like I really don't pop up in anyone else's community. That's just me. Because I know how it felt when Freddie Gray died, when photographers just parachute in, don't care about my community, capture these images, and then go back home and collect their check. Because at the end of the day, some of the images can be detrimental to my community. So that's like, I would never just go to Detroit and just pop up like, oh, if Detroit is having protests, I'm gonna start shooting everything and then try to sell my work. No, because the work that I do, this is my life's work. I'm tied to it. It's something that I believe in. It's other ways as photographers we can help each other. For instance, like people will want to fly me somewhere, and I say, well, let me do a little bit of research. Let me find somebody on the ground. Like I have friends in Oakland. Oh, we want you to go shoot in Oakland. Well, I got some photographers that's from Oakland and know the community better than I do that can assist you. You know, so that's
Mhm.
like just one of my moral compasses, that respect for other people's spaces and communities and stories. Because I just feel like I'm not meant to tell every single story, you know, and I found that out after I was able to travel a little bit and meet other photographers and go to other communities. Sometimes I capture images for myself. They might be good later for a retrospective, like, oh, I traveled here. But I try to be very respectful of other people's communities and stories, you know, unless I actually have the time to spend in those communities to really tell that story.
So Rosa Maria is not going to expect you to be popping up in Detroit anytime soon.
No, but if I did come to Detroit, it would be more so, you know, I have a lot of respect. Like if I go to Oakland or where I spend a lot of time, I will contact photographers that I know on the ground, and they would take me out to the community and tell me like, oh, this is this community, these are the issues in this community, you know, and we will go out and do things like that. But I try to definitely, with the work that I do, is try to make sure that my work, I respect people's community, because I've seen it so many times where people will go to a community, interject themselves, shoot a bunch of stuff, and then disappear and never to reach out again. But now they're controlling the narrative of this community because they have the imagery, and which I find is very disrespectful for people that's on the ground day in and day out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it would involve a lot of trust in knowing that community. And Rosa Maria, you've lived in Oklahoma and Texas, but you have said that you wouldn't be the photographer that you are if it wasn't for Southwest Detroit. Can you explain to us what exactly about that city impacted your work so much?
Well, because I was so young, I don't really, I can't say like, you know, when you're developing photography, I was born in Oklahoma, lived in Mexico, you know, this is all before I was 10. And so I think when I started developing, it's like, it just makes you who you are. Like if I wouldn't be the same person, because if I lived, let's say in Ohio, it would be a whole different perspective. So Southwest Detroit, you know, has a huge impact on me because of how much I love it and all the experiences that I had here. And, you know, to Devin's point, it's like everybody's different. And I think it's very hard to say, well, you shouldn't be coming to this community. I think as long as there's respect, that's the biggest thing. And sometimes you need to decline work and be like, this isn't my story to tell. And it's always the same thing, because I've gone to different cities to photograph, for example, the line protests. And for me, the biggest thing is respect, is going to, you know, traditional ways of approaching elders, of asking for permission, of spending time with them, and realizing that, you know, maybe just this communication is enough and these photographs don't need to show the light of day. Like, respect is like the biggest thing for me. And so Devin coming, you know, to Detroit, I respect his work. So like, it wouldn't bother me because I know he shows the same level of respect I do for other people. And so that makes a huge difference, instead of, like he says, seeing parachute photographers come down here and not respect, or people even from the outskirts of Detroit I've seen come and shoot documentaries. And it's like, there's people in the community already doing this work. Why don't, instead of being, you know, individualistic and thinking about ego, about you being the first one to do something, reach out to these nonprofit organizations and people who are already doing the work and collaborate. Because I think collaboration brings out the best in a lot of work, because it's showing the voices of many people. So I think, you know, collaboration is something that's really, really huge and something that people should think about more. And that I learned all of that here, growing up in Southwest, growing up with all the people that have helped me, and, you know, being community oriented. And, you know, when I needed a camera because my dream camera broke and I couldn't afford to like get it fixed like 50 times, my community stepped in and was like, hey, I'm going to pass down this Rolly that would belong to another photographer from Southwest who's Puerto Rican, and you're going to shoot, you know, with this. And it means something even more because it's coming from your community. So, you know, it's like they've never let me down. They've always only, you know, pushed me further and made me who I am.
I want to ask you guys both a question about some of the more complex aspects of your work. Devin, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I mean, as a journalist or someone with a camera, you're often in a situation that's very complex. There's both light and hope, but as well there is loss and tragedy. How do you be present and try to capture those inspiring, images of humanity without sort of feeling like you're turning away from the frustration and the pain that's also there? And because essentially you want to, I guess there's that dynamic of trying to compel people to action by showing people how bad the situation is, but as well wanting to make sure that they feel that there's hope here. Maybe I'll start with this one.
Yeah, it's really, really tough. It's something that I've only been doing photography for, I started in 2013, and then it was just like next year, Mike Brown protest. So it's something that I had to learn as I've been going, and the crazy thing for me is like I've, documented a lot of the things in 2015, just being in those moments, it felt like I was in a movie. I went through really bad depression, anxiety, PTSD, you name it. I was mentally unstable after like just going through the riots, the uprising and everything, but I still had to like get on TV, do these interviews, do these talks, put this smile on my face, and like no one knew what I was going through when I went home, and a couple of years later, I found out that all the other activists that I had met on the ground, that I had marched with, were going through the same thing, having suicidal thoughts, very depressed, anxious, anxiety, scared to come outside. Luckily for me, photography is therapeutic for me because it allows me to digest my surroundings and then regurgitate it. So I'm actually getting a little bit of that weight off me by sharing the work. And I think the toughest thing about the work that I do is that I'm in my community so much, and I'm so tied to the work that the work is a part of me. And lately, like I've lost a lot of friends, and a lot of my images end up on obituaries. Because that's and that's something that I've been trying to digest over the past couple of years. When you get that phone call, down to the point in Baltimore, we have an Instagram page called Murder Inc. Baltimore that posts all the shootings and the murders that happen on Instagram, to the point where I had to like take it off my page because I would check it every morning. But as I document my friends, and then I just documented him and took a picture of him and he's dead the next week. Or the mother and the family and friends are reaching out because they love this image that I captured. So it's kind of like a gift and a curse, pushing through it. But I understand that the work, when I see the joy definitely in the family's eyes of the peers that I've lost, and they have this imagery down to my own family, where my uncle just passed away from COVID in April. My image of him was on the obituary, so it's just even, it's some heavy stuff, but it still brings light and joy and memory. So I understand the importance of the work, and I've seen the people that I've been able to touch. So like sometimes when you're in these spaces, it's not even about you. You have to sometimes put your own mental health and physical health on the line if you want to be the change that you want to see. So sometimes I just put all that to the side and say, I'll deal with that later, because I know that the work is inspiring. Kids in my community, they want to be photographers now. Like to be from, a place like West Baltimore and have kids studying my book and being able to see their self in their own imagery, is just it's an amazing feat for me that I can go and visit schools and kids get inspired and want to take different routes in life, because now they believe that they can be a photographer, they can do those things. So a lot of times I just push forward and try to always realize in the back of my mind that it's community work. The community is changed by it, they're moved by it, they're inspired by it. I just want to make sure that I leave something behind for the next generation to continue to work.
Absolutely, thank you. Rosa Maria, can I ask you the same thing? How are you walking that line as well?
Sometimes not great, but it's hard. Yeah, I don't know. It's like Devin just hits the nail on the head. I can't add too much more to it, but I will add that as much as I ask for people to be vulnerable with me, I hold that standard to myself. So, for example, when my father passed away, I photographed the funeral and did all of that as a way of grieving and showcasing it to people that, I also make those vulnerable sacrifices, and, that way people know more about me as well, not just the people that I photograph. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard, especially like you know, when you're dealing with Indigenous women who, you know, right now are being murdered at a really high rate, hearing their stories, trying to figure out like how to help, and not knowing what to do sometimes, because I'm not a qualified therapist or anything. And so it's just really difficult to try to, you know, find those lines and
Yeah.
figure out what to do.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both so much for sharing all of this. I can't tell you how much, how inspiring this was, just to hear from your experiences on the ground. It really went, the conversation went somewhere I wasn't even expecting. So I really want to thank you for doing that. I'm sure everyone listening is excited to see where your lenses take us next.